Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Welcome back to another episode of Raising Them Up, the Parenting Q&A podcast, where we answer your questions. And we would love to have you submit a parenting question, and you can do that a few different ways. One is by going to the website for this podcast, which is raisingthemup.org, or you can email us at raisingthemup@generations.org, raisingthemup@generations.org, or there's a toll-free number that you can call and leave a voicemail. It's 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567. All right. Well, we want to jump right in and take our first question for today. So, Brooke, what is the first parenting question we have?
Well, it's quite long, but I think it all is applicable. Help. My son is destructive. He's 3.5. I can imagine with a 3.5-year-old boy.
Isn't that redundant? 3.5 and destructive? Isn't that kind of the same thing?
So it says, I don't think he's bad per se. I recognize that he's being a boy. Of course, I want him to be able to behave in the proper settings, which usually isn't an issue. However, lately he's being rough with his peers, who are mostly girls or boys that are younger than him. He is so sweet, and he isn't mean-spirited, just rough around the edges sometimes. He's also pretty impulsive, and it's getting to be a little mischievous as he gets older. He loves to take things apart and press buttons, etc. I want to get him outside more, but it's challenging to do that and run the household. I also have a younger child and a husband who is working a lot of hours. How can I encourage him and provide outlets for him to do the rough and destructive and curious stuff while also holding on to boundaries? I also think he needs some toddler responsibilities. I'm open to any advice. Thanks.
I don't know why, but the words of Barney Fife are going through my head. Nip it in the bud. Nip it, nip it, nip it. No, in a real sense, I mean, this is just describing 3.5-year-old behavior. It doesn't sound like there's anything abnormal here. It doesn't sound like this child is off the charts in any way. This is just normal 3.5-year-old. But what you have to do is you have to start laying down the ground rules, the boundaries. You have to start being consistent, right? And so teaching this child what is appropriate, what is not, you better do it now, right? Because it's definitely not going to get any easier. So discipline, of course, is going to be an important component, being consistent with that. I would recommend my Raising Them Up book. So Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians. We have a chapter in here called Be the Parent, and also a chapter on child discipline, and another chapter that's called How I Taught My Children to Sit Still and Be Quiet. When you're talking about the need to be quiet in appropriate times, you want to be able to, if you have to, take your child to a funeral and, not have them create chaos. And so snag this book. I mean, this is really the nuts and bolts of how to disciple your children from toddlerhood to life launch, right? And so Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians. This is available at the generations.org web store. If you go there and type in Israel Wayne, you'll be able to pull up all of my books, and so I would recommend that. But we do want to give you some specific advice beyond just buy our parenting book. Brooke, what do you have to suggest for this mom?
Well, I can totally relate, having had some boys. We're on our 5th boy, who's now 6, so he's a little bit still in that take everything apart mode, and it's just challenging. It really brings to mind Ecclesiastes 3 through the last part of that, where there's a time to tear apart, a time to break down, and a time to build up. And that's one thing, especially in that 3 to 6-year-old range, I really pressed in with our little boys and would talk about, this is a fine thing to tear apart, say a Lego building, or to take apart the blocks that they crafted themselves, not little brother, but that they themselves crafted, and talk about this is okay to tear this apart. But then we also would inspire with our children to be people that build up. And of course, Samson was a great story, as not 3.5 maybe, but more towards the 5, 6-year-old range, when you want to talk to boys who are just eager to show off how strong they are and what they can destroy, helping them understand that strength that they've been given needs to come under godly direction and behavior and be used for God's glory in God's way and in His timing. And so that was a story that we often would use with our boys. And just realizing that with that tearing down, there's always a time that comes to build it back up. For little 3.5-year-olds, that's a little challenging. But getting them involved in any kind of thing where they're active with their hands is super important. Of course, any kind of building with their toys and so forth. But if you can get them in the kitchen, even if it's Play-Doh, I'm not even saying it has to be real food, but something where they can get those muscles working. All of that play is so useful for helping them to define how their muscles work and get that fine motor skills going. But the more a mom can direct that time, that free time play, so that it's somewhat purposeful. We're going to run around the yard and we're going to pick up all the little sticks and we're going to throw them in our fire pit. Or, we're going to weed this garden. We're not going to take out the good plants, but we're going to actively show them, here's the weed. Anything that's getting their muscles moving and active is going to help them. They need that direction. And then, of course, in its own way and in its own time, they need that time to learn. There's a time to sit still. There's that time to be active and there's a time to sit still. And that comes very hard for 3.5-year-old boys because they have gotten very fast at running and they have gotten very loud and they have gotten to points where they realize how much joy there is just being alive and running around. And so training them little bit by little bit, the intentionality to make it happen, to do it little bit by little bit every day, just for little segments can be increased. We don't need to break their spirit and make them just sit there for long, long periods of time. They're little tiny people, so do it little bits at a time. But then that helps them when they can finally grasp that concept of being still. You can start reading books and pointing out the pictures and having them increase their attention span. That comes in so handy when you want to start teaching them academics.
Yeah, and physical exercise. I know we hear from a lot of listeners who live in cities, and they say it's very hard for us to have opportunities for this 3-year-old to go outside because we don't live in a safe neighborhood or we live in an apartment building or something like that. And so finding places where your child can go, if there's a good park in your area, try to make that as frequent a time as possible. Maybe even scheduling something at the YMCA, or if they have tumbling classes or something that a 3.5-year-old can participate in that helps them to get that physical energy out is very important. I would say whenever it comes to a child harming another child, that needs discipline. That's something that you simply cannot allow to continue. And so the child needs to learn we don't harm people, even just with aggressive play. But aggression in a young boy, that's a good thing. You don't want to squash that. You don't want to turn a boy into a girl,
right?
Behaviorally,
right.
And so having lots of opportunities for him to be able to get out and use those muscles and run and exert himself, that's going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. Because and also, I would say, think about diet too, because if you're giving your child a lot of sugar, a lot of processed foods, certainly caffeine, those things really hyper exaggerate behavior issues. And so you do yourself a favor if you cut back on those types of things, especially sugar and caffeine.
And I would say with the interactions with especially younger children, that the best way to train a youngster in that is to just practice, so they're in that segment and mom says, put the toys away. And all of a sudden that 3.5-year-old is mauling over the toddler brother because of his eagerness to put it away. And so we know that's an area like, oh, no, that's after the tears have subsided. That wasn't a good way to go about it. Let's just think about when you stand up, look around and you go through all of those motions with your children. It takes a lot of time. It feels like, okay, that took half an hour to get the toys put away instead of my doing it myself as a parent. And yet that training process is so valuable. We had a youngster that never seemed to be able to go through a room without hurting somebody. And, you start wondering, is this intentional or is it not? But in addressing it and then just every single time practicing it again, as soon as the the I'm sorry's were over and all that. Practicing, you have to be mindful of your body that's growing larger as you go through a room or go through the actions of putting the toys away, so forth, to just recognize there's other people. And that helps their awareness to grow, how to be considerate. So, for this mom, I'd say, you're doing great. You're recognizing that the little boy needs to have his energy expended in a great way, and that you got to put some good boundaries in. And the 3.5-year-old will grow up faster than you know.
Okay, what's our next question?
Our oldest, who is 16, starts his first job this week at a local grocery store. He has always been homeschooled, and this is a new season for him and for our family. He is also planning to play in our homeschool basketball league in the evenings, which is twice a week, from October till February. He also participates in youth group twice a week as well. As a mom, I'm nervous it's all going to be too much. What words of wisdom or boundaries would you put into place to help him be successful in this new season?
Well, I would say as a dad of a 16-year-old son, I'm in that situation right now, actually, that does sound like too much. And particularly if he's still doing studies, which it sounds like he is, to be 2 nights out with sports, 2 nights out with youth group. Is that correct? Did I get that? All right.
Yes.
And then probably church, on Sunday. And that's, I don't know if that's a lot, and then probably other homeschool related things and friends. And so, I think that I would start looking at what can be cut back there. So if I'm trying to evaluate homeschool sports, youth group, and the job, right? Yeah. Yes. And so this new job, and I'm ADD, so I wasn't really listening when you were talking. How many hours does he work?
Does it say?
No. Oh, okay. That's why I didn't catch it.
But at 16, it's going to be
part-time.
Part-time.
Yeah. So, but still, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a lot on the plate.
So, all right, I'm in favor of the job. I think the job's a good thing. Young men need to start earning money. They need to start learning some responsibility, learning how to submit to a boss, just developing a work ethic. There's a proverb that says that it's good for a man to bear the yoke when he's young, have a little weight to carry. And so I like that idea of the job. I think that's a good one. Homeschool basketball league sounds like a good thing. The opportunity for him to get some physical exercise, be able to do it in a hopefully controlled environment. There's a couple concerns that I have. One is that he's spreading himself too thin time-wise. The other is, at 16 years old, with social interactions, it's very easy, if he's not a leader, if he's a follower, to start being negatively influenced. Mm-hmm. And what concerns me is if he's doing the youth group and the basketball team and the job, if his attitude changes, like if he starts getting moody and disrespectful and picking up bad habits and start sneaking and doing things that are maybe not typical. I just saw a similar question like this where a teenager started smoking marijuana. The parents found joints that he had, and it was coming from work. It was coworkers that were getting him into that. The difficulty is you don't necessarily know where the negative influences are when you're intersecting all these activities.
Right.
It's hard to extract it out. So one thing that my mom always said when I was a teenager is, well, we'll watch the fruit. So if I wanted to play on a basketball league, for example, she would say, we'll see how this goes. If this is impacting your studies, if you're picking up on bad habits and behavior, we're going to agree ahead of time before you even sign up for this that the plug can and will be pulled on this particular social experiment. So I knew that going into it. It gave me motivation to behave well and to, manage all my responsibilities faithfully, because I didn't want to have that fun activity taken away from me. But I think it's a good thing to do, is to say all of these are contingent and any one of them can be pulled at any particular time. So obviously you would think that the most likely opportunity for him to have negative input is going to be through his job, and that could be, but quite often young people know this is a non-Christian environment.
Yes.
And they go in there with that thought, with that expectation that I need to have my guard up a little bit because these people might be trying to dissuade me away from my values and convictions and belief, right? So I'll tell you the one personally for me as a dad that I would be the most concerned about, and that's actually the youth group. And I know that sounds a little ad hominem, like I'm attacking a whole category of churches and youth groups. Here's what you have to do with a situation like that. Generalizations are things that are generally true, right? And so this is a generalization that's generally true. Most church youth groups do more harm than good. And I can hear people screaming at me through the speakers who are listening to this saying, well, not our church and our youth group's different. And we're, or I'm a youth pastor and we have a good youth group or whatever it is. Okay. So are there exceptions? Yes. Statistically, 12% of youth groups are nominally okay.
Is that from Barna?
Yeah. So George Barna's latest research says that 12% of youth group leaders in churches have a nominal biblical worldview.
Wow. That's so low.
Yeah. And so basically what you're looking at is 88% do not. George Barna, in a podcast interview that I did with him that you can find on YouTube if you type in Israel Wayne and George Barna, he said, youth groups today, statistically speaking, are doing more harm than good. Now, this is not my opinion. This is not George Barna's opinion. This is statistical fact. And so your church might be in that 12%. And if your church is in the 12%, I'm not talking about you. So you don't feel obligated to have to write me hate mail. But that we know statistically, that quotient is a known problem. Mm-hmm. And that you're going to get mostly negative results from your kids being in youth group. And again, I know that's hard for people to process because people have really assumed, again, the average Christian, 85% think it's the government's job to teach their child academics and send them to a government school. But then, most parents also think it's the church's responsibility to disciple them and to do spiritual formation. And the scripture does not teach either one of those concepts. And so, I would be looking at the youth group as something to cut. And again, if it's a situation where your youth group is the exceptional one, then, maybe I'd be looking at the basketball and cutting that back. But yeah, he's something he's going to have to give, and he probably can't be doing all of it. Again, you're the parent. We're not, right? For this child, for your child. So you're the parent. You have to pray about this. You have to do what you think is best. But you did ask for advice. And so what we do on this show is we give you advice. And so, again, we talk about this a lot with social interactions, but Proverbs 13:20 says, if you walk with wise people, you'll become wise. Mm-hmm. And 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good character. And so start watching and see if there's negative behavior, and then see if you can kind of pinpoint it and have conversations. How did work go today? Who are your coworkers? What are they like? Are there Christians there? How have you been treated there? How do they, have you talked with anybody about your faith? How are they responding to that? Just have those kinds of conversations. I have a son who's working right now, and we have those conversations when he comes home from work, and just trying to get a feel for what that environment is like.
Yeah. And so one of the things that came up the first day is like, wow, these people use a lot of foul language. And my mama heart sank because it's like, oh, our children have, thankfully, because we didn't grow up with foul language in our homes. I did not. They haven't had that, been exposed to a lot of that. And so, you know how it is when you hear things all the time and you hear this expletive used, and when something bad happens, it just starts coming out of your own mouth. And so my thought was like, oh dear, it's so easy to get into a bad habit of using foul language. And so we had that conversation right there and just tried to encourage him. You're hearing people. Yeah,
I just wanted to jump in there. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I was going to say this happens in a Christian environment too.
Right.
Because we've had teenagers who have worked for Christian ministries.
Right.
And they tell us they hear it probably just as much in their environment. Yeah. So it's interesting how we always want to create this nice little Christian bubble for our children.
It would be nice.
Yet, even when we've tried to put them in the Christian bubble, there are coworkers who are professing Christians talk like that. And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's just something that I think is important to remember. Like, even if your kids are going to Christian college, Christian university, like the behavior of most professing Christians is not really different than the world in most cases. And so that homeschool basketball league, probably got a lot of profanity going on there. Just saying, right?
Good.
So those are things that, we want to try as much as we can to point them to good directions, but it also isn't wise for us to assume that because it's a Christian homeschool co-op or it's a youth group or whatever, it's a Christian organization they're working for, that the environment is what it should be.
Right.
So.
Right. And then secondly, in that launching aspect, something we've talked about a lot is what to do with those new finances, because of course, 16, and in this case, our son is 19. Those finances are like, boom, I've got now money at my fingertips. And it's like, okay, wait. These children sometimes have been provided such a home where they've never had to contribute anything. Hopefully they've contributed chores, but I mean financially. Right. And, that aspect of learning, there are real life expenses. And so we've become pretty big on charging for some insurance on the vehicles that our children drive back and forth to work. Just realizing that's a very real, direct,
real life cost.
Yeah, it's a real life cost that's associated with that job. We've just heard from so many parents where that child has, especially a young teenager, they have that first job and then they just blow it all. And then the parents later on in the older teens and even early 20s are still handling the whole finances for the vehicle and so forth for the child to get to work, or the lunches that the child needs to take to work, so forth. So, and I should say young person in this case. But that's been a big thing that we've tried to sit our youngsters down and say, if we've never had the tithing conversation in particular, that's definitely going to be happening then. And then really encouraging them, this is a wonderful season for you to save and to limit yourself on how much you spend just frivolously.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully those things will be helpful. Definitely pray about it, talk about it as a married couple, have a united front, form a consensus, watch the fruit. And if you start to see bad fruit, see if you can narrow it down to where is this coming in, where are the bad influences coming in, and be willing to pull the plug if you feel like it's coming from work or wherever it is, be willing to disengage that. And our final question for this podcast episode is...
So we have a question about what is the value of reading aloud. I hear a lot about that in the homeschool families, and I'm just wondering, what are the benefits?
All right. Well, I know you have some answers on that. I do as well. In fact, I wrote a whole chapter in Education, Does God Have an Opinion on Literature? And I think you'll find it really helpful as far as some macro guidelines about how to choose good literature for your children. And we know of a source where you can get some good literature, which is the same place you can get this book, and that's at generations.org. To get my book, go to the Generations web store, type in Israel Wayne, and my books will come up. But Brooke, I know you have some thoughts, and I want to recommend some of their titles as well. So,
well, I do have a lot to say about this. I love reading aloud. And kind of what we were talking about in our last segment, you watch the fruit and you go, wow, there is so much fruit to be had and to be developed, I might add, in the reading aloud process. My mom was a big person for reading aloud, and I just remember those with such fondness, those times, because it really developed into like good relationship times and good discussion times. As a young mom, I was convinced that somehow in reading aloud, I was going to kind of circumvent any hyperactive tendencies in my children. I don't know if it worked or not, because I tend to think the first several just didn't have those tendencies. And so they very willingly went through my very long process of pointing out every butterfly and bug in each book and each page that we had, and memorizing a lot of the books too. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was a little funny. Anyways, maybe our younger children needed it and didn't get as much, but we love reading aloud. We have some nice long winters here in Michigan. And so it's really, those lovely cold winter nights are so perfect for reading aloud. But I find that the conversations that we have are the real gem, because you're reading these books and sometimes little children's hearts are pricked. And so whenever I talk on this, I always first say to people with, say, ages 8 and up, maybe even 6 and up, to read a book called Treasures of the Snow. by Patricia St. John. And I was very delighted to see that Generations has just started carrying Patricia St. John's books. They're all just beautiful books. So back to Treasures in the Snow. This story just details the inside heart of this little gal who has some bitterness in her heart towards this young boy in the city, towards this young boy in the village who has done harm to her little brother. And the ways that she goes through understanding the scriptures and forgiveness and the Lord are just so sweet, but put at a child's level. And so those conversations, like that's what I really love. But, Reading Aloud has conversations about why are there volcanoes in the world? Why do animals act the way they do? All kinds of things. So I see that our children's vocabulary is definitely increased, especially in comparison to a young reader reading on their own, because they get to that age and yet they don't quite understand reading well enough to understand the big vocabulary words. And there's that pause that you can take when you're reading aloud for a child to ask the questions. When they're reading aloud, they just tend to skip past it and maybe skip that page or whatever and just keep going. But you can really lead them through that learning process, that thinking process when you're reading aloud. Of course, the family shared experience is something that I also love, because we'll start using little lines and quotes from the book and say, oh, isn't that like the story that we read together? Oh, do you remember this? And we start having that become part of our family culture built on those shared experiences. So I love that. And of course, there are so many rich biographies that we can learn from real people, especially missionary biographies. They're just incredible for understanding how people who have given their lives for the Lord have done it through hardship and yet have stuck with it. They've had perseverance. And then, of course, there's lots of nonfiction books to be had, too. Interwoven into our family Bible times, we've done sermons. And while those are a little bit more tedious to read aloud, there's just an ability to really unpack some scriptures. Right now, we're in Romans, so we're reading through quite a few Romans commentaries and sermons, but it just helps because the children are then getting that in our family times together. And so then I'd also like to just add that it provides an opportunity for us to develop our children's thinking through that recalling. We can say, oh, remember this story, or even like refer back to your last chapter you just read. Do you remember what happened here? Tell me more about it. And as they give a little bit and tell you about it, they just are becoming more able to vocalize their own thoughts, their own beliefs. And I just see that's such a beautiful thing for later on in their life. So as a family right now with some of our younger children, it's always interesting to say younger children for our family. So I'll put it more, our children about ages 9 through 14 right now, we're reading aloud Taking the World for Jesus by Kevin Swanson. That's been an amazing book for taking in together. And the chapters are long, so we're dicing it into about 4 times a chapter. And just the discussions are so beautiful. Also, I want to recommend some of the books. These are a little heavier books that for that age group, but The Holy War or Robinson Crusoe, these beautiful books put out by Generations.
So Family Robinson.
Great family read alouds.
Heidi.
Yep.
There's so many of those classics, and we've talked about this before, but the older versions have the Christian content that the newer publishing houses and editors have taken out. So Generations has preserved the originals that have a lot of great Christian content.
Yes. Yeah, we sure do.
So we would encourage you to check out those books, those literature books at generations.org. Also, we'd love to have you visit our ministry, which is familyrenewal.org, familyrenewal.org. If you're interested in booking Brooke or I or both of us to speak at an event that's being held by your church or other group, you can go to israelwayne.com. israelwayne.com, and there's information about our topics and contact information there. So we would love to hear from you. Also, feel free to connect with me on social media. Just look up Israel Wayne or Family Renewal, wherever you hang out online. Make sure that when you go to our website, familyrenewal.org, that you sign up on our email list so that we can let you know about new products and when we're going to be speaking in your area so we can keep in touch with you that way as well. Thank you, and until next time, thank you for joining us here on the Raising Them Up podcast.
This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.